And so in looking over his physique at 17, he appears to have the physique of a smaller 14-year-old boy. He does not have a lot of muscle, doesn't look athletic, doesn't look like the kind of guy that in a couple of years is going to be able to put on 60 plus pounds of muscle.
So I was watching this video from Greg Doucette the other day, and he was doing a natty or not on this guy called Max Uceda. And something really bothered me in this video, and it's something which I've seen Greg Doucette do several times before. And it's sort of like part of his formula for these natty or not videos. So what he'll do is he'll take a look at some photos of when the person was young. He'll make an assessment of their genetics. And then based on that, he'll decide whether he thinks their transformation was natural or not natural. And, obviously he looks at other stuff, but this is like a big part of his argument. And so specifically in this video about Max Uceda, he puts up a photo of when he was 17. He was a skinny teenager. And then based on that, Greg declares that Max Uceda has bad genetics, he's an ectomorph, and there's no way that he could have done this transformation naturally because he started off skinny, he had bad genetics, so he must have used steroids to end up looking so great several years later. Now, here's the problem I have with this. I don't think you can just look at someone who's skinny and declare that they have bad genetics. It's not always that simple. So I do think there are cases when you can look at someone and say, oh, this guy has great genetics. And, there are many examples of that. You can look at young Steve Reeves, young Ronnie Coleman, young Chris Bumstead, right? Anyone who looks at these photos, it's clear to see that these guys had amazing potential for bodybuilding. But the way your body looks isn't just purely dependent on your genetics. There's also environmental factors. And a very big part of that is, for example, the amount of calories you're eating. So we don't know if maybe Chris Bumstead or Ronnie Coleman or Steve Reeves, they looked so amazing, not just because they had great genetics, but also because they were eating enough food, they were athletic, they were doing other sports, and so their genetics had an opportunity to express themselves. Whereas maybe Max Uceda and maybe many other people, they're skinny not because they have bad genetics, but rather maybe they're simply not eating enough, right? Greg Doucette is always talking about calories in, calories out, which is what dictates your body weight, right? So what if someone with amazing genetics stops eating? What if we take Ronnie Coleman and we lock him in a gulag for a couple months and we stop feeding him? He's going to come out and he's going to be absolutely skinny. He's going to look horrible. And if you show a photo of skinny Ronnie Coleman coming out of a gulag to Greg Doucette, is he going to say that he has bad genetics? I think he probably would. But the genetics are something you're born with, it's something that's in your DNA, and it's something you can't change. But your body can look completely different depending on how much you're eating or how much you're not eating, right? So what if Max Uceda was actually born with amazing bodybuilding genetics, but he was skinny as a teenager, not because he had bad genetics, but because he wasn't eating enough. Maybe his parents weren't giving him enough food. Maybe he was depressed. Maybe there could have been 100 other things going on for why he didn't have an appetite and he wasn't eating enough. And that's why he was skinny. If someone is skinny, they're not eating enough food. If someone is fat, they're eating too much food. It's not just genetics that decide the way you look. And I've experienced this personally as well. Before I started training, I was extremely skinny. I looked like a toothpick, right? My arms, they were like toothpicks. And not just at Max Uceda's 17, even in my early 20s, my arms were absolute toothpicks, right? So you could have looked at those photos and thought, oh, this guy has bad genetics for his arms. Then I started training, I started eating properly, and within months, literally months of starting to train my arms properly, they blew up. And several people have told me that I have great arm genetics. So which was it? Did I have bad genetics in the beginning and then my genetics changed and now suddenly I have good genetics? No, your genetics don't change, right? You're born with them. What changed was my environment. I started eating enough to actually put on weight, and I started training hard to actually stimulate some muscle growth, right? So if someone is just sitting on the sofa, they're not athletic, they're not doing any sports, they're not eating enough, they're going to be skinny, even if they have the most incredible genetics. And the big issue I have with this argument is not just that I think it's, misinformation. The real issue I have with it is that it's just feeding the black pill crowd. These people who think that nothing's possible without steroids. You've got all these people that'll say, oh, if you start off skinny, then what's the point? You need to be jacked when you're born, otherwise you have no chance, otherwise you need steroids. And the irony of it all is that Greg Doucette is claiming that Max Uceda is actually the one pushing people towards using steroids, because he's saying that, oh, people are going to start training, they're not going to look like Max, and so it's going to push them to use steroids.
People are going to watch this and think, wow, I can do it too. And then when they try and don't, they're going to want to use steroids. They're going to look at this guy and say, wow, he gained 50, 60 pounds of muscle in a couple of years. I only gained 5 or 10. What's wrong with me? And they're going to resort to taking steroids.
But the irony is that it's actually Greg Doucette who's pushing people to use steroids, because he's saying that if you're skinny, if you look like Max when he was 17 and you're skinny, then you need steroids to transform your body and to look incredible. Because if you're an ectomorph and you're skinny and you have bad genetics, then you're screwed. You're never going to have an amazing body. You need to use steroids. That's what he's saying in this Natty or Not video. He's saying that Max Uceda, he could not have done this without steroids, because look how skinny he was.
Does this look natural? Even with great genetics, this would be very rare. At the age of 20, he looks far better than I did, and I have way above average genetics, and I began training at 10. And I went through puberty at 12. I have world records in the bench press.
Of course, Greg Doucette could do it because he had great genetics as a kid. So he could look, amazing when he was young without steroids. But Max Uceda, no, he was skinny, so he can't do it. But Greg Doucette can, because Greg Doucette had great genetics. So I think it's actually Greg that's pushing people to use steroids. And it's actually Greg that's feeding these black-pilled idiots who won't even try. So I think if you want to make an assessment of someone's genetics, have them eat properly, have them train hard, have them train consistently for years, for 1, 2, 3, 5 years, and then see where they land. You can't just take a skinny person and declare that this guy has bad genetics before he's even started training, before he's even started eating properly. You need to try, and then after a couple years, maybe we can make an assessment of your genetics. But by that point, you probably won't even care, because you'll be jacked. So that's all for my rant today, guys. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.